My name is Julia Masaska and this is Made. Today we have a special guest. His name is Dave Hopkins. He's a professional podcaster and he has brought out about 150 episodes with superstars in graphic design like Aaron Draplin and many other really cool designers. Make sure to check out his podcast, and today we're going to be talking about how to create a podcast from scratch. So stay tuned and have fun.
Hi everybody, how's it going?
So good to have you here, Dave. So today we're going to be going through different topics about creating a podcast. From starting from scratch and to the different things you might have to keep in mind by creating a podcast. So I'm gonna be introducing you to topic number 1. It's gonna be how to create a Spotify podcast from scratch.
All right.
Dave, so how easy is it to create a Spotify account, or how accessible is it to everybody of us normal people?
Okay, so it's horribly difficult and nobody should do it. I'm completely kidding. It is significantly easier than you would think. I would not describe myself as a very techie person. I have an understanding of it, but it is not my strong point. It does not make me feel warm and fuzzy. So I usually shy away from some of that stuff. But getting into creating a podcast and all of the steps there and getting it distributed out onto platforms, there's so many different ways to do it. And every single one is pretty darn easy to do.
Okay, so tell us, so do you just go on Spotify and create an account? How do you go about it?
So step 1 is you need to find a podcast host service. Actually, I'm going to rewind even further. Step 1, before you even venture down podcast lane, is commit. You need to commit. If you're thinking, I'm just going to start a podcast and go for it, who is it for? What's the purpose of the show? What's your angle? What's your niche? What are you going to do differently? First decide who it's for and commit to being a daily podcast, a weekly podcast, a monthly podcast, whatever it's going to be, commit. Because
so you're setting yourself guidelines that you're going to be following, the people that you're looking for, and all of that?
Definitely. Who is it going to be for? Who are you trying to entertain? Or is it just for entertainment? Are you trying to educate? What are you trying to do? So sort of have some idea of what you're trying to do, first off, by starting a podcast. What are you looking to gain from it? And what are you looking to give back from it? Get it all on paper and just know that information, because that will help you as you go forward and as you make these different steps. If you don't have that set and you don't have the commitment, people will not make you part of their routine in their day, in their week, will not be looking for your podcast episodes. If it's inconsistent. So be consistent and commit. So that would be the first thing I would say before I even explore any other mediums. The second is you got to decide on a podcast platform. So there's a whole bunch that you can host your podcast on. There's Buzzsprout, there's Simplecast, there's Anchor.fm. So many different places that will hold your podcast and host your podcast for you. Then whether it's through your phone in the beginning, just recording through your phone, whether it's through Skype and recording that way for interviews, or maybe it's just you in GarageBand, a free software on your Mac, or Adobe Audition, whatever you're using or wanting to use for software, that file you create using that will then go to that podcast platform and be hosted there. And from there, you can integrate and get your distribution out to the different networks.
Okay, so you don't directly upload onto Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you have someone doing that for you.
Correct. Yep. So the platform takes care of that. So I do my interview, I edit my interview, I use GarageBand, and right now I'm learning Adobe Audition because I'd love to make the switch over to an Adobe product. Shout out Adobe.
Yay.
Yeah. And then once that file is created, I personally use Buzzsprout, and I upload it to Buzzsprout. It's a really small fee per month, and you basically pay for the amount of hours of audio that you require to upload per month.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay, so it's like a flat package that
totally.
you buy?
Yep. So for my case, because I'm publishing episodes 5 days a week, I have purchased higher amount of hours per month than somebody who's doing a weekly podcast might need, or so on, right?
Makes sense.
Yep. So then from there, you will connect your Spotify account once you sign up for that. And Spotify just recently launched Spotify for podcasters, which is a really cool platform. They're really emphasizing podcasts and doubling down on it. And they have some really cool analytics within that for podcasters.
That is very useful.
Mm-hmm. So once you've created your Apple through Podcast Connect, it's a special sort of Apple site. You can just Google Podcast Connect and sign up and put in your Apple ID and just create your little podcast there. Mm-hmm. You do the same sort of thing on Spotify, log in and just create your little podcast account there. Then each of them have what's called an API key. And this sounds super complicated, but it's so simple. It's so simple because it gives you the instructions on how to connect these different things. Your podcast hosting platform gives you the instructions on how to connect all these pieces. And it's really easy, I promise.
Awesome.
You plug in your API key to your podcast host, and it automatically distributes as you upload new episodes to the podcast host.
Wow, sounds so easy. I might want to try it.
You should.
Cool. All right, so let's get to number 2, the monetizing process. Okay, Dave, so what are the ways to make money with podcasts?
There are lots of different ways to make money with podcasts. The most common out there would be podcast advertising, finding a product, service, or something like that that you feel would resonate with your particular podcast audience, and getting advertisers to pay you to create a 15 or 30-second ad spot for them and post that at the beginning or in the middle or at the end of your episode. Mm-hmm. They usually are charged per 1,000 listeners. So if it's a monthly podcast, to make, a considerable amount of money using that method, you need to have a pretty huge listener base. Being a daily podcast and having my podcast called The Quickie, I don't want to, I'm already trying to condense it and make sure that I'm within or as close as I can be to that 30-minute cutoff for myself. So I don't have any podcast advertisers for mine.
Okay, are you planning on any? And what will be the preferred, preferred companies?
I would love to. I like the fun, quirky kind of stuff. So any company that is making software or really cool, brushes or features for, design software, things like that. I'd love to partner with something like that. Also, any designer who has a whole bunch of merch that's really cool and really popular, wouldn't mind partnering with some of them as well. Mm-hmm. But I just, I don't quite know. And it's on me to really pursue that, I think. Unless they found me and came to me, which would be kind of cool. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I'm using my podcast to build an audience and sort of promoting my own programs, my own stuff that I want to share and educate designers on, which is print. So you can go out and get external advertising, or you can use your podcast channel to advertise for yourself.
That is very smart. Or for example, your design business or anything that you're doing to make money. So I think it's a really cool way. And I mean, your audience is actually really made for the things that you're doing, right? You were telling me something about print school that you're planning on.
Yeah, so in a couple of days from doing this interview now, I'm beta launching to founding members Print Design Academy.
Oh, wow.
So my background is in the commercial print industry, and I love print. I'm super passionate about print, all kinds of print.
I love print too.
It's amazing, like taking your design and creating it into something tangible, not just holding the same design you saw on screen, but maybe it's a unique paper with a cool texture, and you can really interact and give a tactile feel to a brand, which it's just amazing. And the way that you can interact with people's emotions using print, it's super cool. So I'm super passionate about print, and I basically noticed this gap in graphic design education in the 2-year and 4-year degree programs right now, where there is a print production component where there's maybe a week or two where you learn about it. Maybe you're lucky enough to get a tour of a print shop, and then that's it, we're moving on. So
yeah, I also noticed the same thing. And I think it's totally important to know print technology and to know the different ways of print and the different ways of the way you can produce things, especially if it comes to packaging. I mean, you need to know how it's getting mass produced before you design it, right?
Totally. And knowing where your responsibilities as a designer are, knowing where the potential liabilities for you as a designer are in that print process is super helpful. And what I've come across the most is that designers are worried about having the confidence, or don't have the confidence to reach out or create a file for print, or prepare a file for print, or request a quote. Just so much unknown. So I want to fill those gaps.
Awesome.
And so Print Design Academy is the education platform and a community for like-minded graphic designers and illustrators who want to better their print skills, learn more about print, to be able to confidently design and create all kinds of printing.
That is amazing. I think that's totally worth it. And that's also a really good way for you to attract your audience from your podcast. So yeah, it's a really cool way. And so let's jump to number 3, and it's going to be all about approaching people. All right, Dave, so tell us more about how you exactly approach people, and what would you recommend, the different ways you would recommend to approach them, and maybe things you would not do. Tell us about it.
So I usually start with about 35 phone calls first thing in the morning to the same person, just back to back to back to back to back, until they have to pick up and they have to be on the show. It's the harassment method. I find it works really well.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Obviously, I'm not being serious 110%. So obviously be respectful of others' time. And people are excited to talk about themselves and share their story. Like we all have that feeling.
I agree. Yep.
So it started with me of finding graphic designers through LinkedIn. That was where I was spending the most time and I felt most comfortable. So I would start by, the graphic designers in my current network who I know personally. I'd reach out to them and say, hey guys, I'm starting this podcast. This is the basis of it. This is what I'm trying to do. Would you like to be a guest on the show? And just give them the opportunity. And I would say that 90% of the time I get back a positive answer. It's very rare that somebody comes back and says, nope, sorry, not interested.
Awesome.
Which is encouraging, which is great, and really feeds into, like what I said, people love to share their stories.
For sure. Yeah. Do you also go out there and, conferences or events?
So I haven't yet, but I am dying to do that, because I think that would just be the next level for me. I love chatting and meeting new people. I love, the wining and dining. I love, eating with people, breaking bread with people. And I love that. So that is my 2020 plan, is to get out there in person and, to put more of a face-to-face rather than face-to-face through a screen or through Skype.
Yeah, that is awesome. And it would also be a possibility, for example, to record your podcast in the same spot, right?
Totally. Yep. So there's plenty of ideas and potentials that we have for 2020 and different events in 2020. And, but the core of this all is be respectful of other people's time, give them as much information as possible. Don't, soften them up. Hey, how you doing? How's the family? That sort of thing. Unless they like that. But just be right to the point. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is what I'm working on. Would you like to be a part of this?
Yeah.
And
it makes it easy for people if they know exactly what you are approaching them with and what they have to do. You just have to tell people what they have to do. I think it makes it so easy.
Yep, and I wanted people to feel that when they are a guest on the show or an upcoming guest on the show, I want them to feel 100% comfortable with being on the show. That's the most important thing to me. So I created a question document which gives them the summary of questions that I'd be going through during the episode. And I send that to them, it could be a month in advance, depending on what time slot that they book into. And that way they get a chance to, make some notes for themselves or know what's going to be asked. They come into it not completely blind. They've got some information about what they're going to be talking about, and it helps them to feel a little bit more at ease. Because even me, being Mr. Podcast and doing all of these podcasts, being on the other side of the microphone, now you interviewing me, it's a little bit of a different feeling.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. And I also really like that you have included a random question into your podcast that the guest from the episode before can put. And I think it makes it really exciting. What was your idea there?
So I can't really claim any credit for that. I was talking with my designer friend Chelsea McKenzie, who I had interviewed. I don't have the exact number of episodes, but I've interviewed somewhere around the 50s, somewhere in the 50 to 60 episode range, I think. Chelsea McKenzie, and her and I were talking about fun ways because she's got a very bright, fun personality, much like myself. So getting to talk to her about the questions and helping shape what her episode was going to look like. And that question was something that came out of that conversation. Why not give my current guest an opportunity to be involved with the next guest? And it also, I didn't realize it in the moment, but the question that she had suggested, which formed the now Ask It Forward question, it creates almost like an episodic sort of situation for the listeners, where they end with a question that's going to be asked, but you got to tune into the next episode.
Yeah, it's true. Like you're involving the guests into your podcast as well. You're making them follow it. And I think that's a really cool way to, to keep the audience going and, and to keep even the guests going. Yeah, I think it's really cool. All right, let's jump to number 4. And it's all about how to make the podcast popular.
All right.
Okay, so what are your ways to, to promote your podcast, and how do you do it?
So there are some things you can do, but I would say that they aren't always going to be a home run. The number one thing to be able to make your podcast popular is to know your audience. Make sure you are actually delivering valuable content to that audience and being consistent about it. Those are the top 3 for sure, because if you're there regularly in their podcast inbox or in their Instagram feed by uploading a episode tile or a photo or something about every episode that you put out, that is that consistency that you're looking for with them, or that they're looking for from you, so that you're top of mind and you're never really forgotten. So that's the big thing. The other part of that is being a little bit strategic about the guests that you have on. Obviously, guests with big followings and big social media presences aren't the first ones to pursue. Like, get in there, make some mistakes with, local designers, friends of yours who are designers, things like that, before sort of really kicking down the door and going out there to the world. That's what I did, and it felt more comfortable and more natural that way, that I had a base and I felt like I kind of knew what I was doing, even though I still don't feel like I know what I'm doing. But
we always learn. That's the good thing.
Every episode there's something that I learn and improve upon moving forward. But yeah, then as long as you're doing those first 3 things, start being a little bit strategic about who you have on the show and finding exciting ways to give them the tools to easily share it with their audience. That would be sort of the number one way. And how I've decided to grow the Quickie is through Instagram. That is my channel that I'm focusing on. It's my channel that I'm looking at growing, and I'm continuing to grow. And that's where I'm focusing a lot of my episode marketing efforts.
Awesome. That is amazing. Yeah, I think Instagram is a really good platform, especially if you're trying to target designers. And if your guests are designers as well, I mean, Instagram is the best way to go. Okay.
Now, the other thing I'll say about Instagram is hit those hashtags. Don't forget those hashtags.
Yeah, that's a good thing too. All right, so let's get to final and number 5 about your time management. So Dave, tell us, how do you manage your time? When do you record? How many times a week do you record? How do you manage it?
It's hard. It's really hard. And this sort of ties back into being consistent and committing to it. I committed to this, and I think I launched back in May of this year, and I've been consistent originally with 7 episodes per week, and I've now scaled it back to 5 based on some research and analytics that I had at the time. And 5 just seems to fit better with my schedule and the audience. Commit to it. If it's important to you and it's something you really want to do, it will become easier to schedule and easier to fit in. The way that I have found that works best for me is I have a batch day. So in 1 day per week, sometimes it's the weekend, sometimes it's a weekday, I will batch 5 to 6 interviews back to back to back to back. And this kind of stuff needs to be scheduled like a couple of weeks in advance. So actively now, I'm pursuing guests and looking for guests for December. I'm looking to fill some of my dates in December for interviews to sort of keep everything going.
Awesome.
Yes. You have to, you don't have to do that as much if you're a weekly episode or something like that. But doing daily, I need to try and be as organized and ahead of schedule as possible. And the other part of scheduling is I'm very lucky in the sense that I have a very, very patient and understanding wife.
Same here.
Yeah, they, our significant others, they are a huge part of, helping support our dreams. Maybe it's not financially, maybe it's not actively, involved in it, but even, just helping with the day-to-day of running a house. I have 3 kids, like maintaining all of the stuff that's going on. Yeah. She works her butt off, and without that, it would be nearly impossible to do this. So, that all plays into it. What do you want to do? What's feasible for your life? What are your goals? And just commit to doing it.
So maybe for people who are having a side job or a full-time job, maybe start with 1 episode per week. So it's not too intense, so you can really keep it up. So it's realistic, to make it consistent.
And that's the great thing about being the host and creator of the podcast is you get to decide. Yeah. You can choose. If you're 1 a week and you're like, you know what, I got more time, I can go 2 a week. Then you get to go 2 a week, and you get to decide that. So it's always in your control. And I initially had a little bit of fear going from 7 days per week episodes, like every single day, going to 5 days a week. I initially had fear about that because at the time I was like, I'm standing out like above and beyond. Nobody's putting out this amount of content. And I kind of had to check myself, and I was talking to my wife about this. There's very few people who are also doing it 5 days a week. And it allowed me to sort of take the pressure off just doing podcast interviews, and allowed me to put a little bit more energy and focus back onto, what's really close to my heart, and is that print and Print Design Academy, and gave me a little bit more time to focus on that dream.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And do you use any kind of software to manage your time?
iCal. I just book them into iCal, and that gives me a glance. I have shared calendars with my wife, so if there's kids' appointments or kids' Christmas concerts, we're coming into that season. Things like that, I can see at a glance, so I better not book this podcast at this time because I've got this going on or this going on. My day job in the commercial print industry, where I get to help customers, marketing agencies, and designers create really cool print stuff that they can interact with their audience with. I have meetings booked for that stuff and phone calls booked for that stuff. So iCal and shared calendars through iCal is just the tool that I'm currently using, and it seems to be working well.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to tell my audience? Things like any kind of specific tips or any kind of motivation when they want to start their own podcast?
No specific information, but I'm going to confirm two things for them. One is you will never feel fully ready. And going ahead, not feeling fully ready is scary. But in the, just do it. Just do it, because it will feel so much better once you're into it and once you're doing it. The second is you won't be able to know everything before you start. You're not going to know you're going to have to sort of fine tune your audience. You're going to have to fine tune your marketing methods. You're going to have to fine tune. I'm on the 10th round of questions for the Quickie podcast. I've edited that. When I look back at the very first document that I created, the question document, I go, how did I even fit this in? 30 questions. And it was too difficult. It was more time constraint and less focusing on the guest and how can I interact with the guest more instead of worrying about, I got to get through my questions. So we're 10 rounds in. I've scaled it back. And I'm in a really good groove in a spot right now, but maybe I'll switch it up next week. Who knows? We'll add something there. So
yeah,
you won't know everything getting into it. You just got to have your best guess and get into it and fine tune as you go. And that's never a bad thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I really think it's also important to learn by doing things, because that's actually where you get to experience what you did wrong, And
absolutely.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for your motivation. I think people on my channel will really appreciate your time and all the insights you gave us today. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk soon.
Oh, thank you so much, Julia. And Julia's audience, start a podcast. If you want to start a podcast, go do it. Why not?
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.